Welcome to Startup Grind. My name is Chris Jonu, and I'd like to give a round of applause for Chris Ridd from Xero. So tonight we're going to hear the amazing story of Xero, but just quickly for all of you that are not familiar with Startup Grind, it's just an informal conversation, speaker series. We'll get successful men along and women, like Chris along and tell their story and hopefully, inspire you guys. And and it's all part of the San Francisco mob where we run the Melbourne chapter here. So that's it. And try and keep the questions to a minimum. I know that sometimes people can't help it and they want to know something right then, but we'll try and wrap it up at the end. And welcome, Chris.
Thanks, mate.
So
here, so do we use this?
Is everyone okay in the back there?
Through the microphone.
Yep. Okay.
Yep.
You go.
All right. So just firstly, Chris, can you give me a little bit of background on your education? What other business maybe you were involved before you started with Xero, and how you got into this field?
Sure. Well, I should declare first up that I'm not an entrepreneur. Can you hear me all right? Go through this. It's not on.
Hello? Hello? No?
Yeah, that's on.
It's on.
So I'm not an entrepreneur. So I need to declare that up front. So I spent all my career in large corporate America. So I started after school. I actually took a year off and went surfing up on the Gold Coast and lived up there for a year, just bumming around. And then when I got back from that, and I'll declare my age, I'm 45, so we're talking about the late 80s here. And I started a graduate program with a company called NCR for 6.5 years. I should say I studied economics marketing, so I did a Bachelor of Business degree. And I actually started accounting, which is sort of ironic that I'm now working for an accounting software company, because I got about halfway through that year and I just thought I've made the wrong decision. I had a passion for technology. I really enjoyed the sort of computer science side of things, but I wasn't technically minded, but I had an appreciation for technology. Because back then when I started, the PC was only a year old when I started my degree in 1985, so it was very early days with the whole tech industry. So I worked for this company NCR, which was it was a bit of a powerhouse back in the late 80s, and worked there in sales, did a stint in the US, which was great. Sort of like an executive briefing centre that we had there, so we'd get customers in and you'd take them around and tell them all about technology, so that was a lot of fun. And then I left NCR and joined Microsoft in the beginning of '96, and I spent 15 years at Microsoft, which I still to this day, great company that went through a real journey. Obviously, from at that time, there was a lot of sex and sizzle about Microsoft, and certainly the growth they had, it became a very, very different company. And I must say, one of the reasons for getting out of Microsoft was just probably grew tired of that big corporate American kind of culture. Again, no regrets, because it was very good. I did a lot of different things there. But I didn't plan to stay there 15 years. And
so was marketing geared towards? Was marketing always geared towards what the US was doing and stuff like that?
Well, what was interesting, and now that I look at Xero with the growth that we're having, and we're just getting started in the US with Xero, but back in Microsoft, of course, everything was driven from the US, and so Australia to a large extent was a bit of a poor cousin. So I think we represent about 4 or 5% of revenue. So it's interesting now that Australia for Xero is the fastest growing geography that we're starting. We spend a bit of time with the US guys, sort of giving them guidance as to what to expect, how to start to figure out their pursuit of the market opportunity over there. So that's a different change. But 15 years. So I've been at Xero. I started as MD here in Australia for Xero beginning of last year.
And was that just a job that was advertised, or they were headhunted?
No, so it wasn't advertised. It was funny. I'll tell you a story about that. So I think it's like many of us. You get to a point in your career, and for me it was a couple of real sort of moments in 2010 where I just thought, this is not what I want to do. One of them was actually, I was part of a partner advisory board, and in April of 2010 I remember sitting in a meeting with 35 of Microsoft's top resellers in Australia, And the mood around the room was very interesting because cloud at that time has really started to take hold, and a lot of these partners had traditional systems integration services businesses, and you know they were you know, it was quite a heated discussion, and they were saying, Microsoft, you need to slow down this cloud thing. You know, you need to slow this down because we're not ready. And it was like, I was sitting there thinking, this is insane. I mean, it's got nothing to do with Microsoft. This is a huge shift that's happening in the industry. And I think at that point I thought, you know, this is probably a good time to get out because there's going to be so much opportunity. But the second time I was in a management meeting and I just did my head in, and I think I almost ended up in tears thinking, well, you know, I need to get out. I want to do something else. And I'd spent a lot of time and learned a lot. You know, I got a lot to thank Microsoft for. But I think you get to a point in your career where you just think, you know, oh, I just want to do something different. So I actually quit with nowhere to go. I resigned. It was a big shock because I sort of had this trajectory to get into probably the, you know, I was a director of the company and probably go further. But yeah, it was just I guess an awakening moment where I just thought, no, I've had enough, and
it was taking your soul.
I'm going to quit, and I went. I took a summer off, went surfing. But I had actually spoken with so one of our former managing directors, Steve Amos, who is on the board of Telstra, a couple of boards, rang me, and it was quite funny because I was in a meeting at the time. I was having coffee with a friend of mine, and I went to him for advice. I said, look, I want to do something different, and he'd been very successful in starting a business and just got into a cloud company, and we were having a chat, and I was running the Dynamics business at Microsoft, and so I was quite interested. So what are you running, you know, to do all your financials? He said, oh, this product called Xero, it's really cool. And I said, yeah, I've heard of it. And so he showed me. I thought that's really cool. Literally, and this is no kidding, 15 minutes later the phone rings and it's Steve Amos saying, there's this mad entrepreneur in New Zealand called Rod Drury, who set up this company Xero, and he's looking for a local MD. The business is just getting started in Australia, but I think it's something you'd be interested in. So, and he said, have you heard of it? I said, actually, I just had a demo like 15 minutes ago, so it's quite ironic. But so, and as it turned out, we caught up, and so the rest is history. We sort of hit it off, and actually it was funny because the first conversation I had with, I have to tell the story, first conversation with Rod, so I'd spoken to Steve, and then I just, tell him to give me a call. And then I shouldn't say this because this has been recorded and some Microsoft people might see it, that's okay. But I was supposed to go to this, so when you're in big corporates, they have these strategic sort of, you know, planning sessions, but they had this culture workshop for 2 days where you, as managers, you have to go to this culture workshop and talk about culture and how the company is going, and feel-good sort of sessions, hold hands, sing kumbaya. And I thought, I rang my sales manager and I said, if I go to this session, I will probably end up hitting someone. You know, I'm checking out. So I rang in sick. Sorry, Paul. I rang in sick. It's 2 years ago, and I went surfing. I got a place down the coast, and I'm going to go surfing. So I went surfing, and I had grabbed a coffee. I was sitting on the deck. The phone rings, and we've got a place down Wye River, if everyone knows it. It's sort of up the back blocks, and it's bird noises and everything. It's Rod Drury on the phone, and he goes, "It's Rod Drury here, Chris. You know, we're building this amazing global company, and we're having a chat, and he couldn't help but notice all these bird noises in the background." He said, "Where the hell are you?" Yeah. And I said, "Well," and I thought at that point, I'll just tell him the truth. I said, "Look, I was supposed to go to this culture workshop, and I've wagged, I've gone surfing, and I'm down at my beach house." And he goes, "Oh, I fucking like you already." So at that point I thought, actually, I think I could work for this guy. And then we met, and then, you know, so, but it wasn't planned. And I think one of the lessons that, because I've been pretty conservative in my career, to be honest, I sort of, each gig sort of landed in my lap and I took that gig. And I think the thing that I learned was 15 years at Microsoft, again, no regrets, and they, you know, looked after me, but it was the first time I'd really taken a risk where I sort of went, you know what, I'm just going to quit and just see what happens. And you know, I've been very fortunate in how it's turned out.
The culture, it's funny you mentioned it because we had Stuart here for whoever came last time, and he seems like a pretty laid back guy as well. Can you talk a little bit about the culture at Xero?
Well, since you mentioned Stuart, it was funny because Stuart and I come from very different backgrounds. So even though, if any of you know about Stuart McLeod, so we acquired, and I'll tell a story in a sec, but we acquired PayCycle midway through last year, and Stuart's a great guy. You know, we get along famously, but we are very different. And one of the things that's been, you know, I mentioned earlier, I'm not an entrepreneur, but Stuart is. And I think one of the things that really helped in the early journey, I went from perhaps one of the most successful commercial entity on the planet to this little startup with 8 staff in Australia, and it was very refreshing. But it was a very different environment, and I think having someone like Stuart, so there was a lot of really good challenge there, because he would occasionally turn to me, I'd be saying, we should do this, and he'd just sort of look at me and go, that's very corporate. and by the same token, I remember when we announced the acquisition of PayCycle, he stood on stage and he said, I think Chris Ridd is one of the bravest managers around, because he said, I haven't had one in 10 years, and here I am, I'm now reporting to him. So, he is fiercely independent, but he's got that entrepreneurial flair, and so there was, I'd have to say a lot of the good decisions we made in the last 18 months, 2 years in Australia certainly have Stuart's fingerprints on them, because I was able to bounce things off and go, this feels right, and he's going, absolutely, that's right. And there were other things where I'm going, I think we should do this, and he goes, no, don't do that, I'll strangle you if you do that. So I think it's healthy. I think one of the lessons there was getting people that have very different perspectives. I think any good leadership team, any good organisation, if you bring people in with the same sort of mindset, you're going to get the same sort of outcomes. You want to have people that are going to challenge you, and I think that's been one of the things that I've learned. And we've had, I look at our background now. We've gone from 8 staff in February 2011 when I started. We'll have 65 staff by Christmas this year, and we've recruited, I think, very well. We've recruited different people. One good example of that is that we've not hired traditional salespeople. We've actually, and you know a bit about Xero in the accounting space, we've actually got the last 4 salespeople I've hired are bookkeepers and accountants. They are really good salespeople, because if you're dealing with an accountant and you've run a practice as a public practitioner, then you understand their pain. And trust me when I say that we've had a lot of CVs from some of the competitors, and we've turned them back. So I'd much rather hire an accountant that's got really good outgoing, that's very passionate about a product that can actually deal with other accountants, as opposed to a really slick salesperson from an MYOB or Reckon that might have the track record, but really from a culture standpoint, it's not really us. So it's been a very important part of our growth and development.
Yeah, you mentioned going from 8 to 65 in such a short span, and you say that you're not an entrepreneur, but I would argue differently, because if you don't have somebody that's running the show that doesn't know what they're doing, it's going to fall flat pretty quickly, and New Zealand will be hearing about it. I know in all startups pretty much, early when you're hiring at such an early, in its infancy, each person that you hire is quite critical.
Yeah.
Is there anyone that you're going, hang on, not right for the culture? Or?
Oh, look, you always, when you start to get to our size, you certainly there was 1 or 2 when I started that have moved on, and that's just natural. But we're still early in the journey. But yeah, I think it's funny because Stuart and I spoke recently. In the very early days, we used to joke about the fact that the day we have to hire a HR manager, we're out of here because it's just getting way too serious. But all jokes aside, probably the most important aspect of building the business is making sure you hire well.
Yeah.
And I think, and that is about making sure that it's not just my decision. We make sure we've got an interview panel that people are looking at different perspectives. And I tend to focus very much on culture fit. So you can get a good functional fit for a role, but you've got to make sure that the person has the growth potential, they are a good culture fit, passionate, all those sorts of things. So I think so far so good. We've had a couple of like any organisation, you get to 52 staff. The law of averages suggests that 1 or 2 may not work out, but so far it's been. I think we've been very fortunate. We've hired a really, really talented, passionate, diverse team.
Oh, I think also also I think it's also like when you're in your early stages there, I imagine that everyone's got different hats to wear every day. Like this is not just your job role because we're small. We need you to be doing this. Man the phones, whatever if necessary.
Well, definitely. I think one of the things you've got to, as you get bigger, the roles become more specialised. And a good example, there's a girl in my team, Sally, who, when I started, and she is amazing. You know, she was doing everything from events and marketing to partner programs, sales operations, admin, travel. You know, her role by the end of this year, her initial role will be split. We'll have 4 people doing what she was doing beginning of last year, and that's just a natural progression. And the challenges there is that people, you know, you hear often that if you want to learn a lot about doing business, go and work for a small company, because you do tend to wear a lot of hats. And you become more specialised as you move into big corporate, and that's just naturally a case of the, you know, bigger corporate has more scale and they need more specialised roles. So that's a journey we're going through, and it is challenging, because you've got people that are used to doing more, and all of a sudden, hey, your role is now going to be more specialised, and that's good in some respects for career growth. Yeah. So you get more specialised, but in some senses, people don't like to let go. I mean, I'm the same. I came in and I was you know, heavily involved in a lot of the sales activities, and now I don't get involved in that as much as, you know, I like to be hands-on, but I've had to let that go. I've had to, you know, we're in the process of hiring, and, you know, we've got 2 sales managers handling accountant, bookkeeping. We're going to set up another role looking at direct and online. And, you know, when I started, I was kind of overseeing that whole thing. So it affects everyone.
Sure. So 8 people to 65 within what span was that?
Yeah, 18 months.
18 months, and now you're ready to hit the US and take the US on? Do you want to tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I think the US is a massive opportunity. The great thing about starting in New Zealand is that, and I know this from the Microsoft days, you know, we used to test a lot of new product and programs in New Zealand and Australia, you know, because they are great markets to test out. You know, we've got, you know, New Zealanders and Australians tend to trial new things. So, you know, the adoption of smartphones as an example in terms of per capita penetration is the highest anywhere around the world, you know, in Australia compared to anywhere else around the world. So we adopt technology. So from that perspective, testing out a business like Xero was perfect for New Zealand. And trust me when I say we didn't get it right straight up front. I mean, you know, trying to go direct, I'll give you a really good example. When we struck up a partnership with Telstra, and of course a lot of the telcos around the world are getting into, you know, to drive broadband and uptake of their services, they're getting into cloud-based applications. So when the guys, and this is before my time, when we struck a partnership with Telstra as the exclusive cloud-based accounting software package for software application for their T-Suite, the guys were doing backflips like, man, we're going to nail this. And they did a direct mail drop, or an EDM. Oh no, it was a direct mail stuffer, right? So 750,000 small business in Australia receiving a Telstra bill with a Xero branded, you know, direct mail piece, and the guys thought, that's it, we're going to take the market. So what happened? 750,000, they got 19 sales as a result. Horrendous. I mean, any marketing person would be sacked for that. But what it told us was that small businesses don't wake up on a Monday morning and change their accounting software. It's the advisor, the accountant and bookkeeper that do that. So what the guys learned from that was that let's position Xero as more a platform to connect the advisor with the small business owner. So we've spent a lot of time and effort in building out Partner Edition, which is a toolkit for the accountant and bookkeeper to be able to service their clients. So now 75% of our sales come through the advisor. And that was a lesson that we learned. Now that model's playing out in Australia, and we're very confident in the early signs that it's going to play out in the US. So we've tested a lot of the business model, and you know, New Zealand has about 400,000 small businesses. We have about, the addressable market here is 1.2. Well, the US is 27 million. So the market opportunity is significant.
But you got some heavy competition too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to just be all easy.
So yeah, absolutely. I think the one thing that really staggered me coming into this role, though, was just the lack of innovation. And I think, you know, with respect to the competition.
What competition? What, QuickBooks would be the closest thing?
So in the US it's Intuit with QuickBooks Online. Yeah. Here in Australia, of course, it's MYOB and Reckon. And the challenge with Reckon is that their QuickBooks brand has also been used, or is owned by Intuit, and that's going away in a couple of years. So, but I think, look, absolutely, it's lack of innovation over 15 years. The one consistency between all of the geographies is that you have a dominant player in each market. So here, of course, Australia and New Zealand, it's MYOB. In the UK, it's Sage. Don't forget, we've got a pretty significant sort of business going in the UK. And in America, in the US, it's Intuit. Now, it's the perfect, if you think about it, because when I started, I thought, actually when Steve Amos rang me and said, you've got to check this out, I said, small business accounting software, hasn't someone done it? They've already done it. But the great opportunity is that you've got an incumbent that has, in many cases, grown through acquisition, so they've got this whole plethora of platforms that they've got to take forward. We're coming in as a challenger to disrupt the market, and it's a really cool thing, and you're able to very quickly, if you've got the right ingredients. We've got a great product, we've got the right model in terms of going through advisor and the advisor channel, and we've got this open API which none of the others have. So we're building this ecosystem of other cloud providers that we want to have plug into Xero as a foundation application for small business. So those pieces are very powerful. And so what's playing out in all the geographies is that we're actually chipping away in a big way into that market share. And we're just we need to keep doing what we're doing. In the case of MYOB, they're trying to tack on cloud into what is fundamentally a desktop product. And as many of you know, because I've spoken to a couple of people who are in the tech space, so the advantages of cloud is I don't have to deal with software, I can access it via any device, and some of those advantages you lose. So we think we've got a lot of the ingredients, we just need to execute really well.
Sure, and I know you do business a little bit differently down at Xero, and we talked a little bit with Stuart, last month or 3 weeks ago, about how you're bringing the add-on partners inside. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how that's changing?
Yeah, I think a big part of. I remember I was at the VMware ran a conference last year, and I was invited to speak on the panel, and they just worked with one of the journalists with one of the IT rags, and they'd done a study on cloud applications, looking at who is open. And I think the paper that they wrote was, who plays nice in the cloud space. And they actually rated Xero number 1 in terms of open applications. And it was only really through the course of last year that we realised just how important that was. And the reason is a couple of things. Firstly is that we don't want to be any more than just a really, really good horizontal accounting application and stick to our knitting. I think part of the challenges in the past with software business models is that, you acquire all these different applications, you end up with this monolithic chunk of code, and it's really hard to be agile. Sure. And the thing I loved about Xero, and I didn't realise until sort of probably 6 months into the role, how important having an open API was, where we could go to customers and say, look, the cloud is a great interoperability platform. We work vendor to vendor with all of those cloud providers, so that if you're a retailer, you're going to need core accounting as a foundation application. I need point of sale, so I can go vend, ClickPOS, various ones. I might need inventory management if I'm warehousing stock. Unleashed, Sin7, there's all sorts of choices. I might need a CRM application if I want to drive, loyalty programs. So it could be Salesforce, Microsoft Dynamics CRM, Highrise or Sugar CRM. So the opportunity for us to promote those add-on partners is of huge value to our customers, who can then piece together these applications, and within days you can have this really sophisticated solution running your business all in the cloud for a fraction of what you would have previously paid subscription model. So very powerful. So our strategy is to really nurture that ecosystem. I'm hiring staff focused on helping to build that ecosystem. Now, getting to your point, to live that dream, we're moving into a new office in a month, and we thought, we're planning for growth, so we've got a lot of spare desks, and we said, well, we can't do it forever, but how about we just sort of open up 10 or 12 desks and offer that to some of our add-on partners who are appreciative, because we've got add-on partners that are offshore that are going, we'd love to get a footprint in Australia, but we kind of, we understand that when you're getting started, you don't have a lot of spare cash, so we're offering desks. We'll charge a small fee. It'll probably go to our beer money at the end of the month, but they're really appreciative, and I think the value we get is being connected with other cloud companies that are close to the action. We can sit down and have discussions about what are you seeing. But the other thing for us is that we know that we've now got over 120 of these add-on partners. Every day they're out there going, look, here's my POS solution or my job costing solution or project manager, whatever it is. And we know that they are promoting Xero every time they talk to customers. Like, man, why are you running a desktop application? You should be in the cloud. Look at Xero. So there's a lot of, we get a lot of payback for supporting that channel.
That was literally the reason that my brothers up the back there why we looked at Xero originally, because we run everything on Google Apps.
Yeah.
And that's how we found you originally. Before I was asked by Startup Grind to find the best startups here in Melbourne. Not that you're probably borderline not a startup anymore, I guess. And again, so then after looking at Google Apps and we find Xero, then we immediately started looking at what are the add-ons that you had. So it was a big selling point to us, at least. What kind of success are you seeing some of these add-ons have as a result of your success?
Yeah, it's we've in the early days when I started, we had about 3,500 customers, and we're now over 32,500. What that represents is an opportunity for add-on partners to approach our customer base with their solutions. So companies like Vend, Unleashed, GeoOps, there's a number of others that are having quite good success on the back of that. We've had a couple actually. It was interesting. There was one partner in particular that I won't mention, but they were struggling with the API, or the lack of an API with MYOB, and they came to us and they showed us this letter they sent to over 1,000 of their customers, or their entire customer base, and they said you should move. We're going to run these webinars on Xero. Such was the power to them, and then I spoke to the CEO of this company. He said, look, the cost of trying to integrate with some of the other incumbents is just too great. We love Xero because it's just easy. So we actually invested some money. We went out on the road and we promoted it, and they're doing really well. They're converting a lot of customers off from some of the legacy desktop applications to Xero. They're winning because it's easier in terms of integration. Customers love it, and of course we're happy. So it's a win all round.
Just backtracking a little bit, you were talking about again, talking with Stuart again, it almost was like a grassroots campaign to me. The importance that you place, and even talking, you're going to do the same thing in America, on building these relationships with accountants. And I was talking last time that the accountant that we've got now that we'll probably switch over to because he uses Xero, really is a brand ambassador for Xero. And so I mean, you've got all these kind of like the soldiers going out there now in terms of accountants as well. How are you finding that, and how does that happen?
Well, I think as I mentioned, trying to go direct when you've got 2 million small businesses and sole proprietors, it's probably the toughest marketing challenge you could ever hope for. It's a very fragmented market, so you need a channel. And the accountant clearly in small business is the trusted advisor. You think about any small business, they have a relationship with an accountant, solicitor perhaps, telco, ATO, you call a relationship. I shouldn't say that. We meet with the ATO every month. Hi guys. You've got many, many different relationships, IT vendor and so forth, but a bank, right? But the one they trust is the accountant. And so an interesting trend we're seeing is accountants getting much, much more involved, not just in business decisions, but also technology. And an obvious one is Xero, because it's an accounting product. We've focused from the onset in building that product. We focused on how we were going to engage that advisor in that relationship. So Xero is very much about amplifying the impact of an advisor. We provide the reporting and a lot of the other tools to allow them to better service their customers. So our aim through that is to make the advisor much more efficient, for them to eliminate a lot of the compliance and actually doing the accounting for their clients, so they can focus on the business of giving advice. And so that's how we've won great loyalty with that channel. And as you've mentioned, I mean, if you're able to give, we've had accountants stand up on stage and say, Xero has changed my life. And I don't say that in a disrespectful way, but it's sort of funny sitting there going, really? But it has, and a lot of these guys are starting to feel that they're getting back into the advice as opposed to, I didn't get into accounting just to do tax returns and get this data file at the end of the quarter, and I have to fiddle around with numbers. And 90% of my time is dealing with compliance-based stuff, and I'm not adding a lot of value. So cloud and what we're doing, I think, is starting to change the industry. And so with that, we're seeing an incredible amount of loyalty and and take up with Xero, which has been quite a phenomenal part of our journey.
Is that a sell to them? Was that a sell to them originally about it's actually going to make your life easier as well as the customer?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think small businesses hate doing accounting, and so I think I've been around software 24 years, so I had a look at Xero and I thought, wow, this is almost like playing a computer game. When you're doing your bank rec, it's like a game of Tetris. So I think if you can make accounting fun and simple, the small business owner, they love it, right? We did a case study recently. This guy runs a company, Globe Design, came from, he's running spreadsheets to run his business. And he came back to us, he said, look, the first time I load up Xero on my iPhone, I'm doing an invoice standing in the queue of the airport. He said, it's just changed my life. Equally, the accountants that are signing up clients on Xero, and typically what happens is that we'll go to the accountant and say, look, there's a different way, it's online, you've got single file, single ledger in the cloud, and you can work on the same set of data. So BAS and management reporting, it's all pretty simple because you're coding as you go, and you can all work on the same data and go, okay. They'll put 3 clients on, and we find that after they put about 3 or 5 on, they go, holy crap, this is actually going to save me about 40-50% of time in actually doing the books for my clients. So it very much was about providing a platform that's really going to help the accountant and the bookkeeper be more efficient. And today we're signing up about 10 to 20 new partners, accountants and bookkeepers, every week. And that just talks to the strength of cloud, and it's not just Xero, it's all the other ecosystem partners that are starting to see that. I heard someone talk about Deputy, one of our other partners, and there's many others that are starting to look at the accountant as a trusted advisor channel to small business and thinking about, well, how do I actually add value to the advisor, make their life easier, and they will recommend my product and use it to be able to then put their advice on top of that platform. And that's a big part of what we do.
Sure. In terms of, I just want to take things off topic for a little bit because we've got a lot of guys here. Obviously, they're here to hear you talk about they're using Xero or they have their own startup. Do you mind if I talk a little bit about, or hear you talk about? There was a comment you made to me when I first met you about that we'll choose to go profitable at a later date, which is a luxury that not many people have. That they can choose when they want to go profitable. Can you talk a little bit about the finance that's backed Xero and more recent events of you about to do the thing with the stock exchange tomorrow?
Yeah, sure. And I'll preface it by saying I think I keep reminding my staff about how unique our situation is, not just because of the growth, but we're kind of in that sweet spot where we're a nimble startup, but we're very well funded. And I think Rod Drury was very astute in the early days, where he's a wealthy man even before he started Xero. So there was a lot of his own money that went up. We started in very humble beginnings in Wellington in a 2-bedroom apartment with 5 staff. But I think our journey is just a great example of where opportunity comes along and you have to seize it. And I think one of the most compelling things, I had lunch with Rod and Craig Winkler, who, if you know Craig, he was the founder of MYB. And back in 2009, and this was a lunch I had just after I'd started, and it's a very funny story, but as the story goes, in 2009, when Archer Capital acquired MYB, and if you know any of the history, that Craig was effectively ousted from the company at that point, resigned, ousted, whatever, but he left. And and it was at a time during the GFC where Archer picked up MYB, probably you'd argue for a pretty damn good price. Well, Rod was on the phone to Craig within about a week, saying, you've heard about Xero, and of course Craig, in that frame of mind, was like, man, the last thing I want to talk about is small business accounting software, if you understand why that would be the case. But Rod being Rod, he's a very persistent man, if you've ever met Rod. and kept ringing. Anyway, finally got a meeting, came over for lunch, and as the story goes, it's pretty funny. And Craig was telling, he said, sat down with Rod, and he's sort of, rambling for his normal hour, about how, the vision about becoming a global company, and then he just sort of finished and said to Craig, he said, "So, what do you think?" Craig goes, "Well, I think I should give you $20 million and sit on your board." And at which point Roger said, "I need to get up," and he actually got out of the restaurant and had to go for a walk around the block. So I think, for many of the startups in the room, you think, that's just a dream come true, but it was an opportunity in the sense that Rod had seen, he'd been competing against Craig in the early days. That was 2009, and the business started in 2006. So Rod had looked at what Craig was doing, and I guess in many respects had admired Craig as a leader. There might be the moment that Craig exited, he knew that this was an opportunity to secure funding from an investor that was probably motivated in the sense he knew who Xero was, and he gave his pitch, and I guess the rest is history. So Craig now sits on the board as number 2 investor. Since then, Rod has been very astute. Was able to secure Peter Thiel, who was a founder of PayPal and the angel investor in Facebook, and that was a huge bonus for us back in the early days, where you could actually, we would state, Peter Thiel has backed us. He's done it twice now, and I think that again, that's a very unique situation to be in, and I think it is. I guess the lesson here is that if you've got a solid business model and can find that investor that's going to give you the credibility, and I think we've been very fortunate, but I think also the business model and what we're trying to do is very, very bold. I mean, to create a global company, to take on some very, very big incumbents in a space that is, accounting software for small business. It's a foundation application. So, the amount that we are spending on the back-end infrastructure to support what we're aiming for now, which is to get to 1 million customers, and we're now at about 112,000 globally. It's an unbelievable investment. I was in New Zealand a few weeks ago looking at how we're going to evolve that infrastructure to support a global business, and it's staggering. So we do need significant funding. So, I talk about these sort of numbers, you go, there's no way I'll ever get 20 million. You probably don't need it, but in our journey that was necessary, and it's certainly helped us be able to block some of the smaller guys who are, yes, they're nimble, but they'll never be able to match that investment. So funding was a big barrier to entry. And then the big guys who have got a legacy of other, desktop and just a plethora of applications, trying to cloud enable those applications is a huge challenge as well. So we're not done. I'm not saying that we've won the battle, but we've certainly, I think the guys have orchestrated very good funding to be able to get us to a position where we're very well placed.
Is the PayPal guy friends with Craig? Was that like a relationship there?
No. So Peter Thiel. No, it's just Rod's done. I hate to think how many trips to the US. So obviously part of that was we've always from the early days had a view that we could become a global company, so cracking the US is very important. So having a very high-profile investor, even though it was, in the whole scheme of things, it was, $4 million. So it's not a huge amount given the overall capital that we've raised, which is up around 70. But it's just the ability to use that name. It's almost like the Willy Wonka chocolate factory little golden ticket, to be able to get around to the different, investment community and to get our profile out into a market that, you're in San Francisco, which is where our office is, and there's a lot of high-profile startups. So we needed, right or wrong, a startup in New Zealand doesn't have the sex and sizzle as a startup in Silicon Valley, but there's no reason why Xero, as a New Zealand-based company that's starting to take on, the global stage, can't be successful on the global stage, even though we're not a Silicon Valley kind of, star, if you like. So. Yeah. So that was a big part of it, was just getting that profile, ensuring that we've got a high-profile name that we're able to associate with, of course, Peter Thiel backing Xero. It says a lot. He's been very successful as an entrepreneur.
Did you notice a lot of press was immediately, surrounding that, him investing in it, and what kind of impact did that have on the business?
Not immediately. I think we blogged it. We're big on social media, so in some cases we have to do a lot of our own media. But they are. I know. the guys over there are using that to their advantage. There's no doubt. A big part of what we do is get out to events. Accountants and bookkeepers, they are a conservative bunch, so they're not sitting on Twitter, every day. They'll go to events and they're looking at some of the, other software providers. So you've got to be there and you've got to get the brand out there and show them the product. It's probably about, see it 3 or 4 times again, and there's something here. And, so of course a lot of the things that we do to present, it's all about establishing our credibility and the fact that we've got, it's not just about the people. It's, we've actually got some serious runs on the board. We've got 112,000 customers now globally. We've got customers in 100 countries worldwide. In Australia, we're signing up over 100 customers every day. So the business model's playing out. We just need to reinforce that and give the confidence to our partners that Xero's here to stay.
The big part of the strategy moving forward, tell me if I'm wrong, is this San Francisco and getting that right now. You're sending Stuart over there, is that correct? And then you've got Ian, the American guy over there.
Yeah.
I was talking to him just today about sponsorship for Startup Brian in San Francisco, and it sounds like they're really trying to get this plan right. And when's all the attack happening?
Well, it's happening now. We're getting some, even though it's early days, and I remember when I started, we'd get 10 customers in a day and we were doing backflips around the office. How cool is this? Double digits, well, and now we get, I don't mean to sound cocky, but we get kind of disappointed if we don't do 100. And I think US is, in that very early stage, it's going to take, hopefully not a huge amount of time, maybe a year or two, but it's a bigger market. It's a more competitive market, I'd say. I think Intuit have a really, they've got a cloud product, something that NYB don't have here. So we've got a tough competitor there, but the early signs is that the accountants, we've been going to conferences over there and we're getting amazing feedback. So
in terms of your strategy, does that mean that are you kind of focused on the West Coast first, and then kind of let's attack the East Coast, or how do you think?
It'll be national over there. I mean, we're starting at the West Coast because, Silicon Valley in particular, because that's where a lot of the startups are. We want to establish that sort of tech cloud-based brand, which is Xero, and then we're hiring. We're going to hire around the different geographies. We're not going to start scattergun. It's expensive over there. So we have to be targeted in terms of the different regions that we're going to go after, and that's what we're Jamie Sutherland, who's the country manager over there, he's now working that plan through. But San Fran was a starting point to really establish Xero as kind of this this really cool startup in the cloud.
Yep.
So that was a big part of getting the branding out.
And a lot of international add-ons. You said you're even housing some of the add-ons from overseas coming in.
Yeah, I think they are going to. It's something that we kind of talked about a few weeks ago when I was over in New Zealand with my counterparts. But they've got a real startup mindset over there. So I'm not sure whether they're going to house them, but it's something that they're certainly looking at the moment. We have one partner in our current office, just because space commitments don't allow us to do any more. So we're only doing that because we're moving to a bigger office with capacity, and I don't think the US guys have grown quite rapidly, so they've got a small office, so I don't think they've actually got capacity to do that. But that's not to say they won't do it if they move to another office. I think that's sort of on the cards now, given the growth we're having.
Sure. If you don't mind now, I'd like to get a few questions for you. Does anybody have some questions for Chris?
So I understand you get feeds from the banks. How did you go about approaching much bigger organisations, getting them to partner?
So music's just come up.
Nick, can you see who's got the music on? Unbelievable.
So the question was bank feeds and
just in terms of partnering, getting a much larger organisation to partner with you.
So the banks.
Just from a strategy perspective, I mean, obviously the banks are there are others. I don't know if there's others, but the banks are some of the big ones relative to your size.
Yeah.
Banks are very large. How did you find getting them to provide feeds to you?
Yeah, look, I'd say it was before my time getting some of those strategic. So the strategic partnerships we have in Australia are Telstra and ANZ. I think ANZ was a natural fit because they're very focused on small business and startups in particular. So it was about finding the right personalities within the bank. And again, it was before my time, but my understanding is that they had a look at Xero and they really understood that this was something different, that they wanted to associate their brand with something that was really innovative. And that's actually worked well for both of us. From our perspective, even though it hasn't generated a lot of additional sales, in the early days, the ability for an accountant to walk into an event and see Xero with the ANZ Bank, it just gave them that sense of comfort that, okay, if the bank's backing you guys, that's really good. Telstra was more so because they were getting T-Suite started up, getting going, and they had a look around the market, and Xero was the best product out there as far as a cloud-based accounting software. So again, the Telstra one's the same thing. We don't get a lot of sales through it, but it's nice to have that association. It's probably less effective now than it was. In the early days when people hadn't heard of Xero, we're the exclusive T-Suite accounting software. Oh, okay, that's pretty cool. And then they'd sign up directly. but we get some interest through the Telstra channel as well. The trick to that, I think it's finding the right people within those organisations that understand, that bought into our vision. It's very hard, when I started, I was meeting with ANZ, we had 3,000 customers, so we were still, it's cool, we really like your product, and we're still working with ANZ. We've sort of got our own momentum now, but we still work with them, and we've got relationships with all the banks in the sense that we're having direct bank feeds, but the marketing partnerships more with someone like ANZ, they've been terrific actually. And we've actually, the great thing is that we've been able to team them up with accountants as well, and they've done joint events to try and basically work together on attracting new customers to both, so it's been good.
A couple of things. Like one was, so I was working for Telstra, and the reason sort of that was put to us that Xero actually joined on the T-Suite was more because of the relationship with Microsoft, because being that T-Suite and sort of Xero sort of integrated. And the other thing I wanted to ask you was, how do you find Canada as a market? You talked about US and UK, so all the big sort of like English-speaking countries. What about Canada? How do you find that?
Yeah, so I wasn't sure about the T-Suite.
Yeah, that was more a comment. It wasn't actually
a
question,
question.
So
Yeah. So I mean,
just telling you sort of how we were given that information.
Yeah.
It's just a different perspective.
Okay. So Canada's outside of all the four geographies that we're in operationally, so New Zealand, Australia, and the US. Canada's probably the next number 5. We don't have any staff or anything there. I mean, the Canadian market is very similar to Australia in many respects. Everything, like the size of the market, the sort of the whole sort of business environment, even some of the accounting standards. There's a lot of similarities, so we have a natural fit into that market. But we're we're looking at it. The challenge we've got is that Australia. So we are the fastest growing geography for Xero, and yet we're only about 4% market share here. So the challenge we have is not spreading ourselves too thin too quickly. Canadian market, South Africa, you could argue that we've got customers in Singapore, Hong Kong, so there's been pressure on us even from India, from places who approached and said, hey, we'd like to represent Xero here. Probably one of the biggest market opportunities is Spanish-speaking South America. So there's some really interesting markets, but the challenge is, we've got so much work to do. We were like 0.001% of market share in the US, and the challenge, given that we're a public company with shareholders, we have to be responsible in the way that we invest, and our belief is that we want to get to profitability in the English-speaking markets and assess each other market. But you can bet that we're absolutely looking at a broader global footprint. It's just a matter of timing and doing things in a way that's sustainable without getting too far ahead. Because you could spend a lot of dough going into even just taking on one or two other geographies. It could delay getting to profitability. So as being a public company, investors sometimes get impatient about how quickly you're going to get to profitability. So we have to be mindful of balancing, global expansion versus, break even. So some of the challenges.
It's a good question.
Yeah, it is.
Sorry, I think go in the middle. Sorry.
When you're planning for growth, I think if you're a smallish sort of business and you have this desire to grow, you can often rip yourself apart physically, trying to get out there. How did you manage that in the early days when you wanted to get out to different environments and had the revenue, but it seemed like you guys exploded so quickly? Was it just a team of people that you assembled to sort of assess everything and make sure you weren't going to burn out really quickly? Was it really planned and you test things out? How much was it really sort of figured out, or did you just run with it?
Yeah, I'll share a couple of stories. It's a great question, and coming from a Microsoft background, everything was very new, and I didn't really know what to expect. But I remember my first board meeting, which was back in April of last year, and I was asked to come and just present, no slides, just talk about the business, and they asked me, well, and I was very bullish. I said, look, I think it's a magnificent opportunity. And they said, what do you think you need? And I said, look, I actually need 5 heads right now. Like I could do with 5 sales, because I had 1 or 2 salespeople, and which now just seems staggering. But with the small numbers, I just said we need to get 5 staff straight away. What was very interesting is the next few months was just, and I went to the next board meeting, which was around the time that we were acquiring PayCycle, and we had to go for approval. And which was a month, 2 months later in June, and there was a clear shift in the thinking, and we're very transparent with the market that in that period the board had decided, you know what, there is a rare opportunity we have to go hard in this market, in the markets that we're in, and they adopted a very, very much an aggressive investment mindset in a short space of time. And again, that was clarified with the market sort of shortly after, where we're headed for break even in the end of 2011. And I remember when I joined, there was just paranoia, like, control costs, we've got to get to break even. And that was thrown out in the interest of, there's a rare opportunity, let's invest hard, go hard. So I got my 5 heads, and then we acquired PayCycle shortly after, and then of course, it was gloves off, we just started going very hard. But I'll tell you, someone asked me before, the PayCycle story was hilarious. I remember it was late May and we're going on the road show, and PayCycle were coming around the road, on the road with us, and I was heading, it was a Sunday night, and I was going up the escalators to Qantas Club, and Craig Winkler just so happened to be coming down the opposite way, and he goes, hey, we need to talk. And if any of you recall, if you're a Xero user, we launched, 2 weeks prior to me joining, we launched this pay run application, which was a very lame attempt at providing some level of payroll functionality in the product, and it was really, poo-pooed by all of our customer base, and it was actually a little bit embarrassing. But the guys were just trying to plug a gap, but just I think what we realised was that payroll is a significant application. Anyway, so Craig says to me, he says, so this is late May, he goes, we really need to do something with payroll. Xero will be number 3 and 4 forever and a day if we don't do something. And we discussed a couple of ideas, and one of the ideas I said, look, we could do a joint venture because my sense is that it is a significant development effort, and the efforts so far have fallen short. And I think that's it. And he said, well, whatever you do, just make sure focus on the customer. He gave me a few tips, and sort of in Craig's true style, it sort of nose in, hands out. He was like, I'm sure you make the right decision. Check you later. So the following night, I'm in Sydney. I'm on a Skype call with Rod Drury, our CEO founder, and we're talking about this thing. And I said, look, I really don't think we can build payroll. And he says, don't be ridiculous, just hire people. And I said, no, it is an application in its own right. This is a significant effort. And I think we're going to bury the dev team. And I think, I'm going to cop a heap of flack because it's just too hard. And we're going to, we'll be here 18 months and we still won't have a great product. Well, we can team up and maybe do a JV with PayCycle. We've had a look at the product. It's really bloody good. He said, oh, no, we've got the R&D meeting in the morning and, I'll probably get approval and we'll push it. And I said, all right. So he rings me the next day and he's going, oh, you're right, no, it's too bloody hard, they don't want to do it. so I'm probably giving you an image of Rod. And he said, so when can you talk to Stuart? And I said, well, as soon as you hang up, because I'm sitting right next to him. So we're in a van in Parramatta, and I love this is classic start, sorry. So we're in a van, and one of his staff's driving down, and Stuart and I are in the back seat having a 6-pack of beers, just talking about this JV. Oh, we could do this. So by the time we get to Wollongong, which is next, we've sorted it all out. So, this is going to be awesome. So for the next 2 weeks, I'm frantically working out, like a heads of agreement with pricing models and revenue share models and all this sort of stuff. And then Rod comes over 2 weeks later to talk about the JV, and we're in a cafe. True story. In a cafe, there's Stuart and John, the two co-founders, myself and Rod, and we just get started in the conversation, and we're getting into it, and I'm going, you've got this revenue share models, and Rod just, eyes start glazing over, true entrepreneur, and he goes, I fucking hate JVs. Like, why don't we just buy you? so, and then I'm on a call to our CEO going, oh God, he's just off to buy, and I'm like, oh no. But what Rod knew deep down was this was the right thing, and what then transpired was, heads of agreement, all the negotiations. We bought the company, and then in mid-July, I'm standing on stage with Stuart announcing it. 7.5 weeks elapsed time, and that to me was just so cool. I just thought, my God, if it was Microsoft or any large corporate, we'd be sitting weeks later. You'd barely have the appointment to even, initiate the discussion to discuss the concept of maybe we should, do this. And here we are announcing it on stage. That was probably one of the highlights, so far in the journey. So an investment mindset, yeah, absolutely, because we then pursued another 2 acquisitions, which we did one in February and one in July. Also announcing we're building online tax. So again, we're probably, a very rare example of a startup that has incredible funding. And the thing that, to be honest, that worries me at times is when I'm looking at my next phase of hiring and growth, I really look at it, I try to look at it conservatively and say, are we over-investing? Are we staying true to the business model? Or are we just expanding it? Because you've got to take reasonable steps. I don't want to be in a situation where we over-invest in one area and then 6-12 months down the track go, oh God, we went a bit hard. So there's a temptation to go, I've got this open checkbook, I can do what I want. And the history, in the last 12 months, we've done a lot, an amazing amount. 3 acquisitions, hired, 40 odd staff. Temptation is to just keep going harder, and so you've got to balance it. Certainly, the board want to see additional growth. Not that we're providing projections, but we don't see it slowing down, so that's exciting. But you've got to do it in a way that is responsible, that is consistent with the business model, that's not going to, leave you hanging out to dry down the track. So it's an interesting challenge, and certainly I feel very fortunate compared to a lot of startups. I mean, a mate of mine, we both left Microsoft for a long time. He was struggling to get one head. He's going, how do you do it? And I said, well, it's kind of unique, but so I understand the frustration of being perhaps in a startup where you're not getting that investment. It's very hard to even just hire the next head, let alone make an acquisition and do it in 7.5 weeks.
Yep. Look, I've got a few questions, but I won't be greedy. Sorry, just one. Yep.
You touched on product development. Your tagline is beautiful, accounting software.
Yep.
How much do you think a integrated, clean UX design has contributed to the success of the product?
Yeah, that's a brilliant design.
Yeah, it's a great question. I was pretty blown away when I looked at Xero from the outset. It's almost I think it's a big part of it because we have developers that don't come from an accounting background. If you have a look at some of our competitors, the UI, it hasn't changed much in 10 years. Whereas you look at the Xero UI, it's a huge part of it. And I think what's really interesting, I've become a bit of a design snob. I never thought I would, but I see, we get approached. We probably talk to about 3 or 4 developers a week, and you see some applications, and you just go, it's pretty uninteresting. And then you see others, you just go, oh God, that's better than us. So I actually liken it to to music, right? You give a band a piece of music to play, and if they hate the music, they're going to do a shit. They'll do a shit job playing it, right? If you give them a piece of music they're passionate about, they'll do a really good job. And it's like that. I think with software development, there's a very strong art component to it, which is, we've got some amazing, passionate, creative developers, some of whom have come from a gaming background as opposed to an accounting background. So a good example is when you do the bank rec, right? If you've ever used Xero to do bank reconciliation, it's a really cool experience. And, you try it with other products and it just doesn't have that kind of sex and sizzle. I mean, I still laugh about the fact that, people get so excited about accounting software, but I think it speaks to the point that people have been in so much pain in using accounting products that they look at something like Xero and they go, well, this is just totally different, it makes my life easy, so they love it. And we see that time and time again. I think the great thing about cloud is that a lot of the cloud developers out there now that are building product are spending an enormous amount of time and effort thinking about the user experience, and I think that is an absolute key to our success. There's other aspects to the business model, the API, the fact that we've pushed through the advisor, but a big part is just make it really, really simple and easy. And you know, we've had examples where customers who hated doing their books are just obsessed now. Just the first thing they want to do, do my bank rec in the morning. It's quite sad, but it's that's a big part of it. Just make it really easy.
This is probably in the public domain, but those 3 acquisitions you made, were they with cash or with shares?
Yeah, good question. So the acquisitions, it was a combination. In the case of PayCycle, I think it was 1.5 million. I think $500,000 in cash and $1 million in shares. We acquired Max Solutions earlier this year. It's about a 6 million mark, sort of similar percentage in terms of cash and shares. Max Solutions, that was really our foray into the practice space. So part of that strategy was we want to get very, very close to the accountant, and we're exposed there. We want to create a practice platform. So we acquired Max Solutions to get access to the practice management software, and then July we acquired Spotlight Workpapers as a product, and again, cash and shares, and part of that is, you couldn't do it any other way. I mean, the Stuart's a great example. He's come into Xero and feels such ownership being a shareholder, and it's the only way you could do it. So it's worked very well. In fact, all of the cases, Gavin George with Workflow Max, Richard Francis with Spotlight Workpapers, they're all slightly different arrangements, but in every case, you want to bring in and actually take on that IP, not just in the product, but also the people that you bring with it. And so I think Xero, the executive, done very well in bringing those acquisitions on board and retaining some incredible talent through the teams that we've taken on board.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but Stuart said something like his shares have tripled. Is that right?
Stuart is the biggest capitalist I've ever met in my life, and he's money driven. But no, they haven't trebled.
Okay.
But they're more than doubled. So he's done well, and deservedly so. As I said, he's the payroll product we acquired. The day we launched payroll on 28th of May, our daily subscriptions trebled that day. They didn't continue to treble, but they've trended up. We knew that we needed payroll in Australia, and I kept saying to Stuart, this better bloody work, mate. I mean, we better get the upside because we've spent all this money, and he's going, don't worry, and so it's worked out well. So, but no, they haven't trebled.
One more question for Chris. Yeah.
You mentioned that you have a target of 1 million customers, and you're about 112,000 down. How do you write that figure, and how early on did you do that?
So I should clarify that it's not a target. We haven't sort of said by this date will be 1 million. What we're doing is we're saying we are building a business for 1 million customers. We're confident we can get there. It could take 3 years. It might take 5. We hope 3. But we're not giving guidance as to on this date we're going to get to 1 million customers. But what it does force you to do is think on scale. And in our case, when I started, the first 50,000 customers took us 5 years to get, and the next 50,000 took 10 months. So we have to be thinking about scale, and so some of the big things you need to think about is, do we have the right business model? Do we have the right structure? So a lot of my thinking right now is, I need to go and hire 5 managers right now, because I'm going to have 65 staff and I've got 2. So we're working through that. It also forces you to think about everything from your support infrastructure to the systems and back-end processes you've got supporting it. So, I'll admit today we use Xero to run Xero. We won't be in about 6 months. We're moving to a more sophisticated ERP solution. That's because we're not a small business anymore. So these are all the growing pains. So you've set your sights on, that's where we think we're going to get to in the next 3 to 5 years. What are all the things that need to happen to support it? You start to build out, extrapolate out all those things. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting there going, man, I might need about 150, 200 staff in Australia. Hope not. because I didn't sign up for that. I mean, I got out of a big business. I said to Craig Winkler recently, I said, I didn't sign up because I had 8 staff. I could have my whole Melbourne team in a cafe, and now I'm going to have 65 by Christmas. I'm not complaining, but it does. What it's forced us to do is really think through the different phases. What are the milestones to get to that 1 million customers?
All right, I'm going to hog the last question myself. When we were talking to Stuart last time, he mentioned I think he had something like I want to say 70%, but I could be wrong, of the New Zealand market.
We had 70%.
It was a great deal. Anyway, the point was that you were getting a credible amount of data now that almost sounded to me like it would almost be the government knocking on your door soon to say, because you guys know when, employee turnover, how much people are really, paying each other and the rest of it, that you almost said that the government statistics were, rubbish.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you raised an interesting point. So I think what the really interesting evolution of our business model is, today we are, cloud accounting product, building an ecosystem of cloud providers, and that's all great. Being in the cloud means that we've got incredible insight into financial data across a whole range of customers and industries, and of course there's huge value in that. I think that the stat he was referring to is that there's probably about 7 or 80% of businesses in Australia that we have in our database, because we've got about 20% market share, we've got about 50% of accountants that are using Xero. So those 20% of customers have got customers that are interacting with Xero. So we've got an incredible amount of financial data. We've actually processed somewhere in the order of about $140 billion worth of transactions through Xero since we've started. Now, you start to think about the value that's in that data. We do know, as you said, we know when an employee starts. We know how much a company spends on advertising. We know when a PC is in its 3rd year of release. We know all this incredibly valuable financial data. Now, with that comes an enormous responsibility around privacy, but you aggregate that data and offer it as benchmark data across different industries that we can then empower advisors to go to their clients and say, look, of the 100 retailers that we are across, average debtor days, profitability, etc., etc. So you can start to see, this is where some of the hybrid models like what MIB is doing, where they're thinking about synchronizing data files in the cloud, is completely missing the point, where you're able to provide true insight into the data and rich web services, not just bank feeds, but online payments, online invoicing, all of the workflows that we want to create in the cloud, business to business, we're going to be able to achieve. And I think we haven't figured out how you monetize that, but I can tell you we've hired 2 pretty smart data warehouse experts that are looking at aggregated data that we can start to think about the next evolution of our business model being, what is the value in that data? Because rather than, going out and surveying, businesses will just have the data, we'll be able to provide that. But again, I'll caution that it's something that we take huge responsibility ensuring that people are confident in the way that we're dealing with that data. But it does give you a sense of where we can take the business. And I think that's probably one of the most exciting things about our future is a lot of the data that we're able to mine.
Well, everybody, I just want to give one more round of applause for Chris and taking time for that. Still a few beers there, plenty of wine, and as with every startup grind, please meet people that you haven't met before and try and take away a few business cards, because that's what it's all about. And next month, just to let you know, we're part of the world's largest startup Christmas party, and that's going to be a free one because the US says the startups have no money. And so we're going to throw a free and have some beers and pizza and do the rest of it. And we got Tom Howard from Ardioso, and he just graduated from Y Combinator, and they're just kicking ass in his travel website. So it's a big deal. If you go home and look him up, you'll see. But basically, this guy is just to give you the elevator pitch on this business is if you're going to Athens or whatever, you've got to look for the Melbourne to London bit, and you've got to look for the next connecting flight and the rest of it. This does it in one search. I'm going to Athens. We'll bring up all the connecting flights together and compare them to. It's exciting stuff. And he's really taken the US on over there. So anyway, he's coming along for the Christmas party. But thank you again.
Cool.